I then got a call from her actually saying that time was very, very short.
I believed it, I just didn't. You just don't know how to take it in. You don't change anything, but you kind of think. You go through the day in the same way, and it's only certain points where you kind of notice it, and it kind of starts to think like, right, this is life changing.
It is a very, very complicated thing, but it is when properly supported and understood by the person who's grieving, is that it is best viewed as some sort of preparation for a future life without the person who has died.
And it was always about like laughing through things. Maybe because we weren't that open as a family, but in whatever way we did, that's how we coped with it most of the time. So
her mantra was always that she wanted all of her children to be happy in whatever they were doing, and no matter the perception of whatever we ended up doing.
The Kubler-Ross model is one of many models, and I think what they endeavour to do is actually to try to make a bit of sense of all these very difficult and intense and overwhelming and fresh feelings that come. I'm Dr. Roderick Erner. I'm a professor at the University of Lincoln. My background is in clinical psychology, and my main areas of interest have been trauma and the effects of trauma on adults, and providing psychological therapy for adults for a variety of personal problems. So when we live our lives, there are constant changes, and all the changes call for adjustments. And some of the more serious and more difficult adjustments to make are to do with death of someone who's close to us. So grieving is really, I think, nature's kind of way of helping us come to terms with a change and adjust to a change, so that we are then able to kind of face the life under the new circumstances for the future. Now, the thing then that tends to be emphasized in these considerations of what happens after a bereavement is emotion.
Now, a little death anxiety is normal. You can expect to go through 5 stages. The first is denial.
No way, because I'm not dying.
Second is anger.
Why, you little...
After that comes fear.
What's after fear? What's after fear?
Bargaining.
Doc, you gotta get me out of this. I'll make it worth your while.
And finally, acceptance.
Well, we all gotta go sometime.
Mr. Simpson, your progress astounds me.
It is helpful in some respects. It's helpful to those who are bereaved, because it gives a structure to experience. And I think it's also helpful to clinicians, because many clinicians don't really understand what it is that somebody is going through. A sense with Kubler-Ross and the others that there's a progression from sort of denial through to, in a sense, stepping into the future life and going through stages. What's not so useful about it is that it tends to create a sort of expectation that this is what you will feel, and then then it becomes almost sort of prescriptive as well. That if you're really grieving, you're really grieving something, then you must go through these phases, and it's a sign of the genuineness of your feelings. Whereas lots of people actually don't go through these.
So what actually happened with your mother?
In June, I think it was June, June in the summer, she wasn't feeling great. Just general malaise, really. She wasn't sure what it was. She had a couple of trips to the GP. I think originally thought she had a bit of stomach upset, a bit of sort of acid reflux, and then things kept progressing. She didn't really ever feel any better, and then she went back a few months later, and then eventually she got referred to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Gateshead, and they found that she had quite an advanced metastatic ovarian cancer, and then by September she was no longer here.
It was motor neuron disease, which is, a lot of people probably know as what Stephen Hawking had, which is the easiest way to explain it to people. Basically, it's all the nerves and muscles shut down in your body, slowly for some, faster for others. Mum had, I think from diagnosis, they were estimating about 10 years, which is extraordinarily good for motor neuron disease, but I think ended up being 5 due to other unrelated complications. But yeah, motor neuron disease basically.
I didn't really find out until she had surgery at the QE. I'm struggle to think of the timeline really. I don't know if it's because it's something that everything seemed to happen so fast at the time, and I haven't really. It's not something that I dwell on really. The sort of timeline of events. It's all a bit hazy really. I suppose I first knew it was serious when she was admitted to the QE and had the surgery, which is probably a couple of months before she died.
I didn't know at the time, obviously, because parents don't necessarily tell you everything, that they were getting tested for motor neuron disease and so forth. But I remember we were in the living room, and it was just before dinner, and it was me, James, me and my brother. My sister was still in Leeds where she was studying, so they just said quite calmly that this is what it is, but then that she does have motor neuron disease. But then they quickly one thing they specified so much was never Google it, never ever Google it. We shouldn't find out about things like that, which I thank God they did, or else there's so much worse things you see about it.
The thing that's important about grief is that it's not just about emotions, because someone close who has died, actually it brings with it a whole lot of practical changes, which comes on top of the sort of emotional burden, and there's often financial things to be sorted out, and relationships with other people and within the family. So the question you put really about what is grief is that it is a very, very complicated thing, but it is, when properly supported and understood by the person who's grieving, is that it is best viewed as some sort of preparation for a future life without the person who has died. So the first set of reactions that I often encountered in the aftermath of death, and this tends to be very early, and most especially so if it is a surprise or a sudden death, is one of denial. And there's a view of denial that one view is that, well, denial is sort of to be avoided. It's much better to let it all hang out. Whereas actually the indications that we have now is that denial is actually something that's very adaptive, because it is nature's way of this is making life for the bereaved a bit more tolerable at a time when actually they're overwhelmed. So to be in denial, early on, is an adjustment. Is a positive. It can be viewed as a positive adjustment to a shocking event.
Did you believe it when you got the phone call, actually?
So I remember going in to visit her at the QE, and she was unlike I'd probably ever seen her before. I feel like we were all as a family like really quite optimistic, and because it was so quick, I suppose none of us really knew how serious it was, even at that time, which I suppose is a bit of a blind optimism really. So I suppose I didn't really believe it at the time, and it wasn't until she was I then moved after, because the operation was successful at the QB, and then I stayed with her for about a week or two while she was recovering from the operation, and then I moved back to uni, and then about 3 weeks after that I then got a call from her actually saying that time was very, very short. So that's when it really hit home.
I believed it, I just didn't. You just don't know how to take it in. You don't change anything, but you kind of think. You go through the day in the same way, and it's only certain points where you kind of notice it, and it kind of starts to think like, right, this is life changing. Because again, at that point, all I knew was Mum couldn't lift her arms above her head, and I was like, that's not that big of a deal, to be fair. She can live with that. But yeah, at the time, it doesn't sink in for a long time, to be fair, long time.
Was there ever any point that it felt surreal?
Oh yeah, I would say it felt pretty surreal the whole time really. I would say from when she had her surgery right the way through until she died, and then quite for probably about a month or two after as well. It did all feel really quite surreal. Yeah, it didn't feel like real life at all.
Has it sunk in yet?
Yeah, obviously the stark reality of it is that she's not here. So I mean, it has. Yeah, it just takes time. It's been a few years now, so hard time to adjust to things.
As a family, was it the humour side that kind of eased the sort of?
Yes, I mean, I think our entire family's like that. The day she did die was possibly the strangest day in my life. I always say it's not necessarily the worst day of my life, it was the strangest day of my life, because I went downstairs and for the rest of the day it was like laughter, because we had God knows how many people turn up at the door and we were just laughing about everything, because it was like at that point it was just, the relief in some ways. So the laughter through the whole thing, and it was always about like laughing through things, maybe because we weren't that open as a family, but in whatever way we did, that's how we coped with it most of the time. So
when there was a period in anticipation, that builds up, and the death almost kind of like comes at a point of relief, whereas for the other, when it's much faster, then in a sense, then the shock of it is greater, and there's been since less time, I think, to prepare for it. Maybe it's one of these things that is emphasized a bit too much. For some people, of course, it is very real. Again, it's depending a bit on circumstances, and the anger really is, I think, to do with kind of like, why me? Why is this happening to me? And of course, in most situations, there is no particular answer to that.
Did you ever feel angry about what happened?
No, I don't think anger is the right word. I wasn't angry with. I didn't have anyone or anything to direct me anger at, really. No, I didn't ever think why me or anything like that.
I would never describe myself as angry. I guess I did develop a temper. I saw that on some nights out and stuff, I guess. Dad used to always say, it's very unfair. And I think Mum used to always say that it couldn't have just been a car crash, she used to always say, because at least then, you're not sat through the whole thing.
I just saw it as very, obviously tragic for me and my family, but I wouldn't say anger, really.
I think I always had, to be honest, the one thing I was always kind of angry about would be when people expected you to come out, or when people expected you to do things, when I was sat there thinking, I can't go out because I want to sit there and just support my dad for a little bit, just have a night in with them too.
Anger with self is often, people who are emotionally very controlled. All through life I have controlled my emotions, but now, now I keep on breaking down and crying, and I'm very angry with myself for not being able to control myself the way I did before. The depression is partly to do with a sense of exhaustion. And with the sense of exhaustion is the kind of feeling that you can't really cope with all the demands of life. And a positive view of depression is that it is some sort of way of withdrawing in order to rest. And to take time out, really. And what's important in that phase is to have the withdrawal, but also to maintain links with other people and keep talking.
The whole time I was struggling was before. I think afterwards there's, as I say, Christmases and things like that. But it was before where I kind of, I don't know if I had, say, depression or things like that. I think I had a fair few anxiety attacks about some things, but yeah, I think the whole time beforehand when it was happening, and like I'd go on a night out and I'd be thinking, what if I get a phone call saying come home, the worst has happened.
I didn't really need to, which was very nice, which was great, because I had a very supportive family, and I did just surround myself with family at that time. And I had some very good friends as well who they didn't really need me to reach out to them. They reached out to me, which was very nice and very helpful at the time. So I suppose the answer is I didn't really need to. People were there for me, which was great, and it's what I needed.
The worrying kind of depression is one where people withdraw and they will not communicate.
Yeah, we didn't. Not initially, I didn't reach out, but then eventually, I think it was once the big moments kind of happened, like the moments where it kind of hit you, like this is life changing. That's when, to friends, family. I didn't. If I ever needed to know something, I'd ask my family, but I wouldn't. Emotional side of things, I don't think I'd talk to my family about it. I'd go to my friends and stuff. But my dad always said that he knew that my friends were good with that kind of thing, and a few of them had similar, like a couple of my friends' mums had died as well, so they had plenty of people to help me. I was never really worried about that. I didn't initially reach out for quite a while, to be fair, but
It is important to understand about, the grieving, and maybe particularly in this sort of depressive phase, is crying, crying and tearfulness, and that can sometimes be distressing for the person who's grieving. It can also be inconvenient, if they're breaking down and crying in the high street, or anywhere really.
Some people sort of wear their heart on their sleeves, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I think some people sort of lean towards internalising emotions a bit more, and I probably lean to that side, which is not, I don't think, bad thing, just different sort of personality trait.
The bargaining is about, I think it's about some kind of negotiation that happens about kind of like what is the future life going to be.
So is there anything with your personality changed before all this happened and then afterwards?
Huge. I think I changed from her being diagnosed to, well, now I think most people who know me would say I've changed a huge amount. I still am laid back, but I used to not talk to anybody. I used to be not shy, but I was never bothered about talking to people.
Biggest changes was that when I was sort of 17, 18 and when I was going to uni. I was probably a bit too opinionated, probably a bit argumentative, a little bit of a know-it-all at school and things. Whereas now I think I'm definitely more pragmatic and diplomatic, especially when it comes to family matters and things.
I'm a lot more of a loud personality now, I think. That was mainly because, when mum's sitting, she has to be sat in the house all day long. I always thought I'd have to be the entertainment. I think that came with it, so I always put on a show to an extent. So I think in those years, I've, in a good way also, because my personality has came out, and I think I have grown in that way, but at the same time it was for that reason. But I don't think I'd be this kind of open and this kind of person if that hadn't happened.
Your video or your recording showed this very well in about like a change of personality, and a much more extrovert person has emerged from this. There's other sort of changes that are to do with changes in family dynamics, and all of these things are things that are negotiated. Acceptance so that moving on becomes possible. And one of the things that is difficult through this, the stages of grieving, is that the feelings of loyalty, the acceptance of a death, and then feeling freer to go out and meet other people and actually to start to enjoy life, to have laughter again, is felt by some to be very difficult, because it feels as if it's sort of disloyal.
A couple of years on now, how do you see yourself going forward now from what's happened?
I think it's probably a big motivation, to be fair, because I always knew what my mum expected of me, which wasn't much, thankfully, but I always knew what she expected of me and what she wanted for me. So it is that sense of trying to make her proud, or trying to have those big moments, as well as I think one of my biggest fears for while it was happening, for after, was what my dad would do, because I thought he's dedicated like 5 years of his entire life just solely on caring for mum. He retired, so he didn't have work or anything. So it was always a fear of, is he just going to be sat in the house miserable?
I think I probably feel a bigger connection to home now, and I feel like maybe before I lost my mum, I might have been thinking at this age, at this stage of my life, that I wanted to maybe travel more, live abroad, live somewhere else in the country, that kind of thing. I think maybe now I've sort of feel like I need to be here probably a bit more than I might have done, which is, I think, is negative and positive in probably equal measure.
He texts me, and he knows me well, clearly, because he said, I know how uncomfortable this would make you, so I'm going to text you instead of tell you face to face, but I'm on dating again. Which is, it's weird, it's very weird. And I'm interested to see how it plays out, because you can't replace, that's fairly obvious, but that is always there, and I still don't quite know how I feel about it. I'm happy as long as he's happy. I am very happy. He definitely deserves it, but just have to, you have to warm up to it a little bit, to be fair. But
sort of, it lingers there in the background, and in terms of future relationships, let's say for adults, let's say a parent who's been bereaved, start a new relationship, it's almost kind of like it's inevitable that there's kind of three persons in this relationship, which can be very difficult.
Do you admire your dad more now than...
Yeah. Oh, I think since, I always saw him as my cringy dad, but now he's pretty much my hero now, to be fair. What he did was incredible. I still can't get over the fact that I was struggling, as I say, just to go to college and school and go back home to it, but he was doing everything, absolutely everything, so it was fairly incredible, to be fair. After what he went through and stuff like that, he is a different person, and we do see each other and talk to each other a lot more than we would, and he's certainly a lot more open with me probably than I am with him, but he's now very open, very outgoing compared to what he used to be, so, but yeah, as I say, he's like my hero now, to be fair.
I think I'm a lot more like me mum than I am me dad. I think pretty much everything in the way I go on, it comes from me mum in one way or another. There's very little. All of my like the vast majority of my success in life I put down to her and her mentorship.
But she suddenly developed a very dark sense of humour, like a very dark sense of humour. She had this powder stuff, I think it was powder. Because she couldn't swallow properly, it needed to be thicker, the liquids, whatever she was drinking. So she had a powder called Thick and Easy, which when she was in hospital, I just picked it up, pointed at it and said, "That's how I like my women."
Significant bereavements, they're never over. But what is important about it is that the extent to which the loss intrudes can vary enormously, and doesn't have to be an impediment to a fulfilling future life.
Alright, so the last thing is just a little bit of word association.
Oh, okay.
So, home.
Family.
Newcastle.
Family.
A strange bunch.
Home.
Mother.
Just crazy.
Father.
Hero.
Father.
Mother.
Life.
Ooh, roller coaster.
Birth.
Death.
Black.
Relief.
There we go, well done.
Oh my God, that last one, Jesus Christ, that hit.
Goodness me.
Really, Jesus.